Hello, dear chess fans. My name is Eugene Grinis. Welcome to my free chess school, from beginners to advanced, open for everyone who wants to improve own game. This video with some tactical exercises is intended for the beginners. There are some practical opening rules for beginners which are usually worth remembering. These rules are: 1. Open with either the E pawn or the D pawn. 2. Wherever possible, make a good developing move which threatens something. 3. Develop knights before bishops. 4. Pick the most suitable square for a piece and develop it there once and for all, or do not move your piece twice without a strong reason. 5. Make 1 or 2 pawn moves in the opening, not more. 6. Do not bring your queen out early. 7. Castle as soon as possible, preferably on the king's side. 8. Play to get control on the center. 9. Always try to maintain at least 1 pawn in the center. 10. Do not sacrifice without a clear reason. 11. Complete your development before you attack. 12. Pay attention to your opponent's moves. 13. Avoid exchanging bishops for knights. And rule number 14. Fight for space. Now, let's take a look at the following game: E4, E5, F4. Attacking the E5 pawn with a pawn. This is actually a pawn sacrifice. This opening is called King's Gambit. A gambit is an opening where one player gives up material with the intention of securing an advantage in time or space. In King's Gambit, the attack is directed against the most vulnerable square in black's camp, F7. The King's Gambit is one of the oldest openings in chess, when white's F-pawn is used to weaken black's hold on the center. If black takes the pawn, accepting the gambit, white tries to regain the pawn later on, after having first secured a permanent advantage in the center. If black wishes to hold on the material, he must submit to a backward development. The best way to meet the gambit is to accept the sacrifice and then concentrating on speedy development, if necessary, returning the extra material. In many cases, white's compensation for the pawn is a strong center or more effective development. In this game, black doesn't take the F4 pawn and plays bishop c5, developing the bishop to the strong diagonal. This is called King's Gambit declined, classical defense. Knight f3, developing the knight and putting pressure on the e5 pawn, but not pawn takes on e5. Can you show why this is a mistake? Please pause the video. Black plays queen h4 check, a double attack, and if king to e2, can you find mate in 1 in this position? Please pause the video. Queen takes e4, checkmate. Let's go back. If white plays g3, then follows queen takes pawn on e4 check, a double attack. Queen e2, queen takes rook on h1, with a winning position for black. Let's go back to the game. Knight f3 was played. d6, c3, with the idea d2, d4. Good is also knight c3, developing the knight, but not pawn takes c5. Pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn on e5. This is not good. Black plays queen h4 check, a double attack, g3, queen takes pawn on e4 check, queen e2, queen takes rook on h1, knight g6 check, discovered check, bishop e6, knight takes rook on h8, knight c6, and black has a great advantage. Let's go back to the game. c3 was played. Bishop g4, pinning the knight. Pawn takes pawn on e5. Pawn takes pawn. Queen a4 check, unpinning the knight on f3. Knight d7, good move. Knight takes pawn on e5, winning a pawn and attacking the bishop on g4. Black plays knight g8 to f6, developing the knight and defending the bishop. Black could also try queen g5, knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, queen c2, the best continuation, bishop d6, d4, and now bishop takes pawn on h2, sacrificing the bishop. Rook takes bishop, queen g3, check, a double attack, queen f2, queen takes rook on h2, bishop f4, attacking the queen, queen h5, bishop takes pawn on c7, with a slightly better position for white. Let's go back to the game. Knight f6 was played. d4, attacking the bishop, the best continuation. Black castles, sacrificing a piece. Here follows bishop to g5, pinning the knight on f6. But this is a mistake. White should play knight takes bishop on g4, knight takes knight, pawn takes bishop on c5, knight takes pawn, attacking the queen, queen d4. It seems that black doesn't have enough for the piece, but queen h4 check, g3, attacking the queen. If king to d1, how can black win material in this position? Please pause the video. Rook to d8, pinning the queen. Let's go back. g3, queen to e7, with an equal position. Let's go back to the game. Bishop g5 was played. It follows knight takes knight on e5, pawn takes knight, knight takes pawn on e4. In this position, white actually resigned. It could follow bishop takes queen. Now, can you find mate in 1 in this position? Please pause the video. Bishop f2, checkmate. Let's go back. Knight takes pawn on e4. If now queen takes knight on e4, can you find mate in 1 in this position? Please pause the video. Queen d1, checkmate. Now let's take a look at the following game. e4, e5, f4, king's gambit, bishop c5, developing the bishop to the strong diagonal. King's gambit declined. Classical defense. Knight f3, developing the knight and putting pressure on the e5 pawn. d6. Knight c3, developing the knight towards the center. Knight f6, developing the knight. bishop c4, developing the bishop to the strong diagonal. Knight c6, developing the knight. d3, defending the e4 pawn with a pawn and the f4 pawn with a bishop. Bishop g4, pinning the knight. Knight a4, trying to exchange knight for bishop. Rule number 13. Pawn takes pawn on f4. Knight takes bishop on c5. Pawn takes knight. Bishop takes pawn on f4. Knight h5, attacking the bishop on f4. But white saw bishop e3, attacking the c5 pawn. Knight e5, sacrificing the c5 pawn and trying to exploit the pin on f3. If now bishop takes pawn on c5, then follows bishop takes knight on f3, pawn takes bishop, queen h4 check, bishop f2, attacking the queen, queen h3, attacking the f3 pawn with two pieces, with a great advantage for black. Let's go back to the game. Knight e5 was played. This is actually a tactical mistake. It seems that white can't take the knight on e5 with a knight, since the knight on f3 is pinned. But in this position, white suddenly takes the knight and sacrifices the queen. Knight takes knight on e5. Bishop takes queen. Bishop takes pawn on f7 check. King to e7. After king to f8 follows bishop takes pawn on c5 check. Black has to give the queen back. Queen d6. Bishop takes queen check. Pawn takes bishop, the only move. Rook takes bishop on d1. Now the knight on e5 is attacked by the knight on h5 is attacked by the bishop. Knight f6. The knight on e5 is attacked by the pawn on d6 and the bishop on f7 by the king. Bishop, knight c4. King takes bishop. Knight takes pawn on d6 check. White has 3 extra pawns and a winning position. Let's go back to the game. King e7 was played. It follows. Bishop takes pawn on c5 check. King to f6. White castles with check, sacrificing the knight on e5. King takes knight. Now, can you find the next white's move in this position? Please pause the video. Rook f5, checkmate. A beautiful mate in the center. Now let's take a look at the following game. e4, e5, f4, king's gambit, bishop c5, developing the bishop to the strong diagonal. King's gambit declined. Classical defense. Knight f3, developing the knight and putting pressure on the e5 pawn. d6, bishop c4, developing the bishop to the strong diagonal. Knight f6, developing the knight and attacking the e4 pawn. c3, sacrificing the pawn on e4. But black doesn't take the pawn and castles. After knight takes pawn, could follow. Queen a4 check, king f8, pawn takes pawn on e5, pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn on f7, discovered attack with unclear position. Let's go back to the game. Castles, d3, defending the e4 pawn with a pawn and the f4 pawn with a bishop. Knight c6, developing the knight and defending the e5 pawn. Queen e2. This is not the best move. Rook e8, f5. This is a tactical mistake. d5, attacking the bishop. Bishop b3. Now, bishop takes pawn on f5, sacrificing the bishop. Bishop g5, pinning the knight. After pawn takes bishop, could follow. e4, attacking the knight on f3 and threatening e4 takes d3, winning the queen. King f1, pawn takes knight. Queen takes pawn on f3. Now the material is equal, but black has the initiative. Knight e5, attacking the queen. Queen to h3, knight e to g4, threatening knight to f2, queen f3, knight e3, check, bishop takes knight on f3, on e3, rook takes bishop, attacking the queen, queen to f4, queen e7, threatening mate in 1, knight d2, developing the knight and preventing mate in 1, rook e8, developing the rook and threatening mate in 1 again, knight f3, covering the e1 square, rook takes pawn on d3, threatening mate in 1 again, rook e1, attacking the queen. Now, how can black win material in this position? Please pause the video. Rook takes knight on f3, check. Pawn takes rook. Queen takes rook on e1, check. King g2, the only move. Rook e2, check. King h3, the only move. Queen takes rook on h1. White is winning. For example, bishop takes on d5. Queen g2, check. King h4. Now, can you find mate in 3 in this position? Please pause the video. Bishop f2, check. Queen g3, the only move. If you didn't find mate in 3, can you find mate in 2 in this position? Please pause the video. Queen takes pawn on h2, check, exploiting pin. King g5, the only move. Queen takes queen, checkmate. Let's go back to the game. Bishop g5 was played. Pawn takes pawn on e4. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn on e4. Queen c4, attacking the f7 pawn. After bishop takes knight on f6, attacking the queen, follows bishop takes knight on f3, attacking the queen. Bishop takes queen on e8, bishop takes queen on e2, bishop takes pawn on c7, bishop d3, and black has an extra pawn and a great advantage. Let's go back to the game. Queen c4 was played. Queen d5. Queen b5. A bad move in a bad position. Now, how can black win material in this position? Please pause the video. Bishop f2, check. Discovered, check. King takes bishop, queen takes queen. White resigned. Okay, that's the lesson for today from the Eugene Grinis Chess School. I hope it was useful and you enjoyed it. If so, push likes, subscribe to my YouTube channel and leave comments. And the last question for today. Did you find an Easter egg in this video? This is another interesting video for you. Firstly, you can always find it in the video description. And secondly, you can catch it in the last 10 seconds of the video, paying attention to Easter egg. Thanks for watching.